Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. We've just had another Thursday Horus Heresy reveal with the commander of the Dreadwing, Marduk Sedras, and it has gotten me thinking about Horus Heresy design and what, in the eyes of the community, makes for a good miniature. You've likely seen the widespread dissatisfaction with the soon-to-be-released Starter Boxed Set Praetors. I'm keen to unpack why. Furthermore, I think this release gives us hope for characters and units that have rules, but not miniatures, going into the new edition. Just a quick note before we get into it, as we're a new channel, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience. So if you enjoy the video, please hit those buttons down below. Let's look at Cedris. I really like this miniature. So what do I like specifically? Well, first up, he gets a bunch of cues in his design from traditional Horus Heresy artwork. The good example here is his helmet with the hood, cowl, if you will. So we've got the cowl over that Knight's Cross kind of helmet going on. That is straight off the cover of a Dark Angels Horus Heresy book. I can't remember which one right now, but I'm sure I'll be able to track down the artwork for the video. Other pieces, he's got a bunch of nods to Dark Angels all over him, but he's not too busy. Plenty of cool stuff going on without it being over the top. Next is his stance. He's got this really nice solid stance. He's standing there, he's got his gun out, he's holding his sword down. He's very grounded, but still interesting in his pose, in an interesting miniature to have on the table. Not overly fluid, just strong and grounded like you want a Dark Angels character to be. Next piece here is the Dark Angels iconography and the weapons that he's got as well. So the weapons are not too intense. The sword in particular I really like in the way that it's got the cloth wrapped around it. I think that looks really cool. I like his little iron halo-ish thing going on in the background. His little, I don't know what to call that, icon behind his head, that Dark Angels piece with the note pinned there. Interesting that they're moving away from the more traditional seals that we've seen previously to these kind of pinned notes. I think they look kind of cool. I like the little grenades that he's got in his belt, this little hourglass, a nod to the Dreadwing. Plenty of cool stuff going on. His cloak looks great. Weapons look cool. Now, parts that I'm not overly keen on with this miniature, he's got these skulls on his thighs that don't scream particularly Dark Angels to me. I don't think they're necessary, maybe, but they're fine. They're fine. They're not too much, I guess, but more skulls doesn't always mean better, GW. This ridging pattern he's got on his sword, look, I don't hate it. Is it necessary? Probably not. Does it distinguish him as being super special? Sure, okay, it can stay. The rocks. Why does he have to be on rocks? Why do we need rocks for our special characters? He can stand on the ground. The world will keep going. I don't know if this is maybe the way they produce their single miniatures, that maybe having them on something for the bases makes it easier to design or easier to print's not the right word, cast in resin, perhaps. But yeah, at least it's not one rock, right? The tactical rock that we've seen with pretty much every special character GW's released over the last 5 years. This guy's got 2 rocks. I don't know if that's better or worse. I think it's better because it means he doesn't have the 1 foot up or down, which means you can snip him off those rocks really easily. Whereas with the tactical rocks, when it's 1 foot up or down, not so much. So I think 2 rocks is actually better than 1, just because you can take them away easier. Now, you'll notice the things that I'm picking up on here are those extra details that don't necessarily add to the character of the model, but make it more busy. So the skulls, the ridges on the sword, he's got this extra little skull kind of on his neck gorget piece there. Maybe not, they're not necessary, right? The miniature would still look great without them, and it just makes it look a bit busy. This one, not too bad, but we've seen lots of other miniatures recently that are they're too much. And the general agreement from the community for this guy is that he's a great model, which is really nice. We haven't had the community be overly positive about Horus Heresy miniatures recently designed for quite a while. So I guess I want to unpack, why does the community and myself and hopefully the listener, why do we like this miniature? Why do we like the Dreadwing Commander? But generally speaking, we don't like these guys. Oh, they've gotten a bad rap. They've been paid out. I've seen memes, endless memes. So why do we like this guy, but not these guys? Well, that question comes down to the accepted aesthetics of Horus Heresy, which may sound a little bit silly or a bit like gatekeeping, but let me put it to you in this way. So when you go to a games tournament, you've got your normal 40k players, you've got some fantasy guys, there's some guys playing X-Wing, doing some Star Wars stuff on the side, and then there's always a couple of old, crusty guys tucked away in the corner, playing their Napoleonics historical war game of some description. I don't know what they're called, I don't pay attention, it's for old people. But a good example is to talk about these old crusty dudes with their Napoleonic miniatures. So they're there, and what's really important to them is this accurate historical representation. So they get their Prussians, they get their French, they get their English, and they want them to look like they looked back in history. They study all kind of history books, they're searching on how to paint them to be as accurate as possible to what was happening at the time. Now, if you rocked up, went to a table with a bunch of these guys, wanted to play with them, and they're there with their French and their English infantry looking perfectly historically accurate, and you rock up with a bunch of World War II German miniatures and say, yep, these are my Prussian line infantry, don't worry about what they're armed with, they count as this. These tanks, don't worry about them, I'm just going to count them as cannons. Well, how do you think those guys are going to react? Probably not overly positively, which sounds silly because it's a game, right? It's a game, but it's their game. They want to play it the way they play it. There's a reason they play a historical game, and that's because they want it to be historically accurate. So when you're bringing miniatures to their table and their game and their hobby that aren't within their accepted historical timelines and miniatures and ranges of game systems, they're going to act negatively. And the same is true for Horus Heresy players, traditionally, that we've seen over the last 10 years or so. The gamers that have gravitated towards Horus Heresy are often those crusty old X40k players who prefer a familiar game system, which is what 7th edition is. It's got those 40k staples they've grown up with. We're talking templates, we're talking armor values, that kind of stuff. But with those more mature aesthetics and less modern GW bling on their miniatures. When I say bling, I'm talking about all those extra details and bits and pieces that are just all over these box set Praetors. At its heart, Horus Heresy is a historical wargame. And that sounds silly because it's a made-up history, but the people that play it, historical accuracy to the existing lore and what we've seen from Forge World, and before then, back in the 90s and the stuff that's come out for Horus Heresy, historical accuracy in their armies and their games is really important to them. So with GW coming out with these new aesthetics, well, it's putting their nose out of joint. A friend described the new Chaos miniatures that we've seen from Warhammer Fest as cartoony, which is not an unfair assessment, even if I think they're a lot of fun. And that's maybe the difference here between the Horus Heresy aesthetic, which is quite gritty, quite kind of old school, minimalistic, quite simple, compared to the new GW style, which is a lot more detailed and perhaps a little cartoony. And I don't say that in a negative way, it is what it is. So Forge World held the torch for this old school aesthetic, but GW is going in a different direction. They're taking the design tones of their 40k range and applying it to Horus Heresy miniatures. We've seen it with recent releases, more so than just the Praetor box sets. We've seen it with recent releases for Word Bearers, that guy with the flames going all over the place. We've seen it for the Imperial Fists. Ran has these giant axes. They're utterly ridiculous. And Night Lords as well, with their bat stuff going on all over them, and the skulls and the skin, and just the way they're posed and the way they're designed. Bigger miniatures, more detail, often more fluid poses, and bigger weapons seem to be the hallmark of GW's design direction for Horus Heresy. So why are they doing this? Essentially, I believe that for GW to make a success out of Horus Heresy and bring it into the mainstream, they need to transition significant numbers of 40k players over to the system. What better way to do this than to link your miniature design to current accepted and celebrated aesthetics within the 40k community? GW have decided the next generation of gamers like their models to be covered in bling. So new Horus Heresy models are going to get covered in bling. They need to sell them, and they need to sell them to new and upcoming gamers, not the 40-year-old men who you see playing Heresy at the old school events. Though, as we see with our good friend Cedris, they're still making miniatures that appeal to the old school community, which is really encouraging and I think really necessary as a nod to those players that have been loyal to Horus Heresy for 10 years and are as excited as new players, if not more so, about this new edition. The next question is whether this new direction is positive or is it negative? Well, everyone has a different opinion on that, and none of them are necessarily wrong. This is a very personal hobby after all. My thoughts are this. Horus Heresy was pretty much a dead system. New miniatures and rules coming out of Forge World had slowed down to a trickle over the last few years, and the quality of those releases was, generally speaking, pretty average. Likely because sales were similarly diminishing, right? So resource allocation was dropping. If a new design direction, accompanied by a big boost in GW resources with this new edition, gives the Horus Heresy player base a boost, which then grows support for our system as a whole, I see it as a positive. The counter is, of course, why do I want to play a new edition of Heresy if I don't like the new miniatures? Well, luckily, there's plenty of great looking miniatures, following the old design principles to choose from and play with, currently on sale from Forge World. Still for sale, for that matter. And look, and if some of them are no longer being sold and taken down like we've seen just recently, there's creative ways to get your hands on them anyway. Won't go into them, you know what I'm talking about. It's hard to see GW maintaining the traditional design principles of minimalism and grit while significantly growing their system fanbase. Finally, I want to comment on what Cedras' release means for other Horus Heresy characters that still don't have models. We've heard rumours that if a character or unit doesn't have a miniature, then its rules have been cut from the new edition. Brutal. But I don't think this is strictly true, and I don't think it's going to be true for every single miniature or unit. I think we can expect GW, and this miniature hopefully proves that, to keep fleshing out the range for those characters or units that already have rules, but not miniatures. There will likely be some cuts, which will be a shame, but hopefully these cuts make way for more dynamic and diverse options that shake up the Horus Heresy playstyle. And that brings us to the end of our Heresy chats for today. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know in the comments if you're a fan of the traditional aesthetics, or excited to see what new Heresy content GW comes out with in the future. Make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.